Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you Brother Chris Ludke with Matt Gallagher for part 1 of 2 of this interview.
Listeners, scholars, brothers, this is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to explore, practical Freemasonry, and not practical Freemasonry in terms of what we should learn about Masonry, because we probably should learn something about Masonry. No, I want to talk about the book, and to do that, I am joined by Brother Matt Gallagher, coming to us from Minnesota, but despite the fact that he might be a Vikings fan, I think we might be able to get through this. He's been a member of the Lodge since 2010, raised in Braden Lodge, past master of Arcana Lodge. Am I getting that right?
Arcana
Lodge, member of Royal Arch and Sons of the Desert. Also, author of Practical Freemasonry, Accessible Philosophy for Working Class Schlubs. The tagline, of course, is the only book about Masonic symbolism you'll ever need or understand. And very interesting illustrations, very interesting book, which is why we bring Brother Gallagher on. Brother Gallagher, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Chris. How are you?
Doing well. So would you like to introduce the book?
Sure. This book's in Practical Freemasonry. It's accessible philosophy for working class schlubs like you and me. The book is primarily a walkthrough of the working tools of Freemasonry, but done so in a way that actually give people relevant direction and specific actionable instruction for how to be a better person.
All right, sounds good. And what drew you to this subject? Why did you write the book in the first place?
It was mostly just me trying to understand how to do that. When I joined, I didn't think I was that good of a person. And I didn't think I was bad, but I didn't think I was good either. I was hoping that I could get a little direction. And I noticed that Freemasonry, I don't want to use words like let down when it came to this, because there's so many great tools in Freemasonry. The whole structure of it is designed to help you be a better person. But I found that the philosophy was either really, really basic, like the kinds of things that any person with like good parents might learn, right. Or it was just really, really esoteric and just went way over my head. And so it just came out of years of just kind of running through the philosophies myself in my own head, giving presentations, talking things through with other people, and doing blog posts for various blogs that I've been a part of. And eventually I just had a book.
So it sort of started as a series of writings, essays, and became something more over time.
Yeah, mostly.
And what drew you to the side of Masonic education?
I've always been a good writer, a good communicator with writing, not so much talking, but with writing. And it's a talent that it's like the only thing I really had to offer. I thought the lodge that I was in, I didn't have a particularly great job. I didn't have resources for charitable works. I'm not much of a volunteer, when it comes to a lot of these things. And I just noticed, out of the corner of my eye, that I think a lot of people were maybe a bit confused the whole thing. If you've been in a lodge long enough, you know that everybody talks about how they need better and better education, but no one really dives that much into it. And usually it comes to, look, I found this paper online, I'm going to read that. And that's cool. That's a great way to do it and everything. My original lodge, Braden Lodge, had a Socrates cafe. So we would just talk about various moral quandaries and things, and how that related to Freemasonry. And I just found that I looked at things in a way different than other people. I call myself a philosophical conspiracy theorist because the way I connect things is probably the way a conspiracy theorist does, which isn't like a good or a bad thing. It's just like, I'll take all the available information I have, even if it's completely incomplete, and I'll try to make a picture out of it. And it let me have some interesting twists on it, and I was able to connect this tool to this maybe modern day concept, and things like that. And I occasionally, when I would give a paper, I would just have someone come up to me and say, I've never looked at it that way. That was fascinating. And I'm like, oh, good. It made me feel good about myself. It made me feel good that I could help someone understand a tool in a way that they never did, because although I think all Freemasons revere these working tools, I think a lot of people just sort of set them aside the minute they learn about them, because they seem rather basic to a lot of us.
To go from the very basic, why do we over intellectualize a lot of the lessons of Masonry when it comes to Masonic education? I'm sure we've all been there and heard 30 minutes where we go into cabal and go into Gnosticism and everything else. So why do we do that when the lessons should be pretty straightforward?
I think that we live in a society where people are more terrified now of being thought of as unintelligent than they're afraid of being thought of as a bad person. We've almost turned intelligence into morality in a strange way. Whereas maybe back in the old days, people would be horrified for the neighborhood to think that they were, had like loose morals or something. Now it's like, oh my God, this this person questioned this scientific concept, and so he must be, a terrible person. And I think when it comes to Masonic topics, we like to sort of signal that, look, I know a lot of technical information about this stuff. Okay, but are you applying it? Are you being nice to your brothers? Are you being good? And I wouldn't say more frequently than not, but I'd say frequently I find that people do fall short of this. I give some examples in the book. One that tends to come to mind is I remember occasionally in an online forum I'll be in, someone who's not a Mason will come in and say, hi, I just need some assistance or some advice. I have a friend who's a Freemason, and he like owed me a bunch of money, or he did something bad, he did something, that was like completely not classy, and I need to know what to do. And Masons will just trip over themselves to talk about how to get this guy in trouble with his lodge, or oh, that person isn't he's not a proper Mason. He's you talk to the master of his lodge. You'll have to bring him up on charges, or talk to the Grand Lodge or something like that. And I'm just watching. Was like, wait a minute. First of all, why are we trusting this person instead of the person who was presumably our brother? Why are we not at least giving people the benefit of the doubt? Why? It's like, why does this come down? Because I think people are just so much more interested in flexing their knowledge rather than applying it. And that's not a Masonic thing. That's just always been the case with people. They're afraid, I think, of doing good in a way that's not quantifiable, because if they don't do a good enough job, I think maybe they'll worry that they're not a good person. And I don't think that's a worry people should have.
Well, I think it's also that sort of element of nerves. Like, you stand up in front of the lodge and you go, okay, I'm going to give education, but I need to make sure it's impressive to everyone. And coming up with 5 minutes seems unimpressive.
Yeah. And, and it's funny because when I was the master of my lodge, something that I was really trying to get done, I don't know that I succeeded in the end. I think maybe spiritually, but as much as we tended to do good education in my lodge, I also wanted to dedicate time to actually calling for assistance that anybody needed. Is there anybody who actually needs the assistance of the lodge to, make an introduction, to help with a problem, to, is there any opportunities for charity and relief and everything? Because even as much as we like talking about information, and we do like intellectualizing this stuff, I think there's just a fear of applying the things and asking for help or asking if you can help anybody. It's pretty wild.
Well, asking for help and accepting help, as you point out, and we'll get to a little bit later on, tend to be problematic. So the book is, a little over 200 pages. It's really dense material in that you bring up a lot of different ideas in a very concise way. So how do we apply this information? I mean, there's a ton here. Should we memorize it? Should we, how do we handle the sheer volume that's in there?
Wow. I think it's actually, I think it's a pretty fun, quick read myself. I don't know.
Oh no, don't get me wrong. It is definitely a quick read, but there's a lot of lessons is basically what I'm trying to get. There's a lot of lessons, a lot of ideas in there.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, I think it could be treated like a reference book. I mean, there's a reason, there really actually is a reason why it's a bright orange book. It's supposed to be visible. It's meant to stick out from your shelf because, like all symbols, they're to remind you to do something. It's like why do we talk in terms of symbols? Because the visuals can connect things in our heads to remind us, oh, I should be a good person. Oh, I should actually deal square with people. Oh, I should treat people on the level. And I think any object, including a big orange book, can remind you, oh, I should really think about philosophy and how I'm a good person. It's a good reminder to take time out of your day to think about these things.
Okay.
Did that answer the question? I'm not even
it does. It's one of those, I've always looked at books and then teaching as well. But when you look at books like this, I tend to pick up on a few things, and then the next time I read it, I pick up on a few more things. Mm-hmm. But it just seems like one of those books that you need to read multiple times, perhaps.
I would probably recommend a good straight read through just for effect, but then it's a reference book. It's if you're having problems with brothers, there's sections on that. There are. It's if you find that you're having a hard time doing the things that are expected of you, go to the section where it says how to be dutiful. It's they're broken down in ways where you can work on these things, and you will be working on these things for the rest of your life. No one should think that any Masonic book is a one and done thing. There's no finishing this temple. You just keep building. You just keep trying to perfect.
Right. So why do you think so many Masons struggle with applying the lessons of the working tools if they're so simple, if they're so universal?
First of all, I want to say that although I do think they're simple, I don't think they're simplistic. I think that we're just, at least in like the Western hemisphere of Earth, since basically the Enlightenment, we've been hammered into these things, forever. As we live in a dignity culture, be a good person, clean up your room, early to bed, early to rise, treat others on the square, give them square deals, be fair. We get told these things over and over again, and when people hear things like, the lesson of the level or something like that, they're like, okay, well, I've been trying to do that basically, so I'll just keep doing that. And I think the problem is that there's nothing really in the lessons, and this is not a lacking in Freemasonry. This is not like, I'm not here to redesign the craft. That's not the intention. Because the whole organization of Freemasonry, the whole concept of a lodge, is a sandbox where you can practice these things, where you practice being a better version of yourself, where the stressors have been removed, ideally. And then if you can succeed in this lodge environment where you don't have to argue about politics, you don't have to argue about religion, you don't have to fight over girls, you don't have to do all these things, you can then take that practice and go out into the real world and be a better person out there where all these stressors exist.
That makes sense. That's a hard part sometimes. You get up into a situation and then you forget the lesson.
Oh my God, it's so easy to forget. I have to. I should, not throw fits of violence. I mean, who hasn't had a relationship where they've thought, okay, well, I obviously overreact when my wife says this, and I'm never gonna do. I know what I'm doing, and I know exactly why I'm doing that, and I got this. And then she says that, and then you go off on it. You're like, what the heck? Because we all these tricks. And I don't want to drag this into a pop psychology thing, but we do get triggered by little things, because we all have these little micro traumas in our life, and we just have to face that. And I think Freemasonry is a good way, and I think Practical Freemasonry, my book, is a good instruction manual how to isolate these kinds of things and say, okay, let's just break this down, because we all have reactions to things in our life, but we can't be controlled by those knee-jerk reactions. We have to learn how to calm down, be silent and circumspect, really think about how things are done, and then act in accordance to those values that we espouse.
Which seems exactly antithetical, exactly the opposite of what modern society expects of us.
Oh,
when you could be recorded at any moment.
Yeah, I mean, look at any presidential debate. I remember I don't remember what the candidates were, but I remember someone was asked, what would be your plan on this? And he was like, I don't really have one. I'm going to get the smartest people in the room together, and we're going to talk about it. And then we're going to come up with a plan that makes everybody happy, which, when you think about it, is actually the best answer you could possibly give. But the candidate was immediately excoriated by, I think, both parties for, he doesn't know what he's doing. It's like, he doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have any ideas. It's like, all right. And so we just have a society where we're expected to know things right away, and we're expected to be perfect right away. And I just in another online forum, I saw the most bizarre thing, and there's my dog again.
Yeah, I heard that one.
Yeah. Someone popping the window. Not that that's going to stop a dog, but we'll see.
So can you explain your idea of the 3 levels of understanding?
Yeah. I believe that that everything in Masonry, or at least most things in Freemasonry, can be understood on 3 levels. The first is the axiomatic, which is just things that are so, commonplace in basic Western morality that they've become sayings. Things like, many people would interpret the 24-inch gauge, for instance, as being almost a restatement of like early to bed, early to rise, makes men healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Right.
The square would be like always give people a good square deal, things like that. Then there's the practical level, which is where it's actually, and this is where I work in, where you're trying to give someone actual.
Somehow your signal dropped out for a second. Going back to practical and starting to You said practical, and then you went, your definition started dropping out.
Gotcha. Okay. The practical level is where your understanding of something is actually giving you actionable advice and direction on how to use that thing and apply it. I'm going to hop onto a different Wi-Fi thing here really quick. Never into the best one. The practical understandings is the second one. That is where you actually seek to understand something in a way that gives you actionable direction on how to apply that idea to your life. And the esoteric is really more about symbolism, beyond just this represents this. It's all the different possibilities that it could represent. How it crosses into alchemy, theology, cosmology, all sorts of fun stuff. Which is really just, I'm not an enemy of esotericism. It's fun, if you really can dive into it. It's just really hard on new Masons. I've noticed when I've looked around the room when someone's giving a really esoteric presentation, and I'm not seeing that click of understanding that you might normally see in something. So, but go ahead. Oh, yeah. I just think they can be understood on all three levels, and all three levels, could be completely different from each other, and that's fine. I work in the practical because unless you know what something's telling you to do and how that can actually get you to your goal, I just think it's an entertainment. I don't want Freemasonry to be an entertainment to people. There's all sorts. I think we all have felt that in some ways. Maybe members come in looking to be entertained and they don't want to put in any of the work. And I think that's one of the ways that we accidentally entertain them is by dazzling them with, sometimes understandable, sometimes, not understandable, incomprehensible stuff. And we forget, oh, by the way, sit in circles when you get downstairs. Don't just sit in separate, tables. Shake people's hands. And when you shake their hands, look at them in the eyes. These are small things, little things that actually bond groups together. And we forget to actually tell people to do that.
Well, it's so exciting when we start talking about alchemy and phalluses.
It is. Yeah, and that comes from a presentation that I got at one of my lodges from a guy who I absolutely love and adore. And he was just talking about the sun and Apollo and the phallus. And I'm just like, what is going on? And I'm not saying it didn't make sense. I'm sure it made sense. It didn't make sense to me, but I'm sure it made sense to somebody, and they were probably pretty impressed. But what did this have to do with me and being a better person? And I got the distinct impression that, again, even though my brother was incredibly smart, that even he didn't have a good answer to that question. So.
Well, it gets to be rather interesting. I tend to look at those discussions, and sometimes, if you're familiar with Happy Days, they had that Jump the Shark episode, and so it became sort of part of the language of today. And I kind of look at those arguments sometimes and go, where does it jump the shark? Where do we go from makes sense, how did we get to see?
Yeah.
And it makes it interesting sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So we discuss education all the time. How can we ensure that we capture relevance and practical action? That we're doing something that's actually taking good men and making them better, to steal a catchphrase from one of the Masonic bodies.
I think we have to. It starts by just asking the people you're talking to, do you understand this? What do you think about this? I'm a big fan of discussion-based education. Apparently, it's often kind of rare in lodges because it's so lecture-based, but I guess it's just me and poor old Socrates are sitting here alone wondering why, we never actually get to ask and answer questions about things in more of a roundtable discussion forum. which I think is the best way to do some of this stuff. I would recommend everyone either do that, after lodge, or even do it during a presentation. I've seen and been a part of presentations that were more discussion based, with whiteboards and stuff, and they're great fun. And I think you get a lot more out of them, because you just don't know what hits unless you actually, can get a little feedback from people. And this is where I think Freemasonry has to lean on our membership numbers, which are so often looked at as like this great shame upon Freemasonry, that, oh, we can only get like 15 to 20 brothers collected in a meeting, and that's for a really good lodge. It's like, oh, that has benefits. I mean, if you had a lodge that regularly had 300 members meet every week, which was not unusual back in the old days,
right?
I guarantee you'd bust out into groups of social groups or educational groups of no more than 25 people in general, because when you get over 25 people, things get really unruly. So if your lodge does have those common numbers of 15 to 25 members meeting per week or month or whenever you meet, lean into it and just treat everything as a discussion, as much as you can, while still paying attention to our protocols, obviously. But that's the best way to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it definitely allows for that sort of synthesis, or drawing the ideas in and starting to put them together with your own. That discussion kind of helps it out because you're an active participant.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get into some of the information on the tools. We're only half an hour into this, and now we'll get to the tools eventually. So you talk about the way the book is laid out. It's looking at these working tools from the various degrees. And so let's start with the EA. What was the most surprising thing that you found or that you wrote about when it came to the 24-inch gauge and the gavel?
This concludes part 1 of the Gallagher interview. Look out for part 2, where Brother Gallagher discusses the practical usages of the working tools of the degrees. The book is called Practical Freemasonry, Accessible Philosophy for the Working Class Schlubs. And as always, on behalf of the Further Light team, thank you for listening. Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.